TM data. So the answer actually is E here for this one. Okay, let's ready when we're... Okay. Now, next question I have for you is, what are the advantages of custom-made Medra CMQ queries? Okay, so for those who put D, that's correct. It's all of the above. You know, these are all the things that you can do with your Medra CMQ query. Okay, what does Jumpstart quality checks do? Okay. All right. So one thing I should say when we're saying integrity, as we talked about the quality checks, I'm talking about the example I gave you is a comparison against the CSR. So that I'm basically referring back to my presentation. So essentially, the answer would have been compare the safety analyses to the clinical study reports. This was more focused on my presentation rather than the integrity concept in general. Yeah, okay.
Thanks, Alan. That was Alan's last question. Does anyone have any questions for Alan? Can you?
Usually, when it comes, the question was about a recommendation for the ISS. It's really the main thing that's important is that that you match up all the Medra codes. Let's say the last study you did was in Medra 17. I would say that probably the best is to take all your older ones that are older Medra and bring them up to 17. If you wanted to bring them up all to the current Medra 20, that would be another thing. But sometimes it's easier to just do it. I think the most important thing is that everything align in the ISS. Whether you want, like I said, whether you want to bring everything to 20, that's your decision. But for me, I think the minimal thing is that everything match up to the highest level that's been studied. And whether you go beyond that, that's your own internal decision. Or your decision with the review division. That's something, a question to ask the review division if they want everything in 20 or not. But I say at least to the highest level that you've used.
I have a question. In your graph about checking, I think you had the ISS, the defined for the ISS, etc. Do sponsors send you sometimes SDTM for ISS? Because you have lots of studies that are legacy, and so sometimes it's easier to bring them to SDTM. So I was just wondering, what have you seen?
We have seen it's more rare than common. Most of the ISS we see are being done in Atom, but we occasionally will get a ISS all in SDTM. I think we've been more focused on what we get most of. Okay?
Hi, I have a question regarding the Venn diagram of adverse events. Would you elaborate more on that? I'm curious. Do you limit the number of adverse events you look at when you form that Venn diagram? Is it across all time? Do you compare treatments in terms of Venn diagram? What are you trying to achieve? And do you have an automated algorithm to do it?
You mean for the Venn diagrams for, because part of, one of our analyses is that we do create Venn diagrams looking at adverse events, but it basically is tailored to what the reviewer wants. I'm not sure exactly what you're getting at.
Oh, I'm just curious about what you're getting at with the Venn diagram. Are you trying to understand if patients have, how many have the same, how many patients have multiple adverse events in common, for instance? Or what are you trying to achieve?
Oh, we do that. One of the tools we have will create a Venn diagram and show the overlap between that. So one of our tools can do that. So yes, we do look at it with one of the tools that we process the data through.
Okay, and do you select the number of events, or is it automatic, all events
the tool,
observed?
based on the tool you have to set up filter parameters, but you can set up a tool to say, I'm looking at all these adverse events,
Okay.
and it will create an overlap map for you to compare different ones that you're interested in.
All right, thank you.
Great presentation. Thank you so much. If you were to receive integrated SDTM, are you able to use the Jumpstart tools to look at that data?
Yes, we can. We have the ability to do it. It's just, like I said, I'm just talking about the more common case.
And how do you handle like multiple patients that may be in different studies that have a common
Well,
subjective?
this is a thing that I can tell you from MAID that'll basically crash it. It will error out on that. What you'd have to do is either go back, if you're going to run it through certain tools, not all tools, but MAID, for instance, you have to go back in and fix it and then run it through.
I think because CDISC is also addressing that, I don't really want to say too much more about how we have to fix it in an ad hoc way for a tool.
Are there any other questions? I see Kevin with a mic over there. Do you have a question, or are you just waiting to give it to people?
Oh, yeah, I have a question if there's another question. Yeah, let's say during the Jumpstart process, you find some issue in data, and you need to actually contact sponsor about that issue. So what was the formal way, and how often do you actually contact sponsor about those data issues?
So one thing is that we provide information to the review divisions about problems we see. It is the decision of the review division, not the Office of Computational Sciences, whether those contacts are made. What they do is they look it over, and we want to make sure that they understand the issue and that we will help them understand the issue better, but it's still their communication with the applicant, not us.
We help them translate the language for an IR, but we don't write it.
So just one more question. Back to your question about what did the tool do, and I think it doesn't check SDTM. So how does the FDA, or do you just take SDTM as face value and you don't check the integrity or from source?
We definitely do. I'm just saying for that particular evaluation, it's not an SDTM evaluation.
Got it.
We
But
have
so
we have a data fit process that goes and checks through it, and that's what Elena was talking a little bit earlier about the core process that we have. So we definitely have routines. for
But
checking
not to
it.
the source, not to the CRF data, right?
Well,
Because
what
there's
we're-
mapping that goes on, and there
Yeah.
could be some things that, like missing data that also occur in SDTM that you don't know about. So that, you just take SDTM as they are.
We check it. There are some checks that we do to look back and forth, but it's not a general map.
So you mentioned CRF data, and sometimes that is SDTM. Ideally, that would be SDTM. So if there were data in our, for those of you that know the ECTD structure, if there were data in the legacy folders and we had data quality issues, and a reviewer can, and in the Jumpstart process, we do look into the legacy data to see if it helps define or redefine the data quality issues that we might be seeing in the data.
I hope this is a quick one. Sorry if I do another one. The annotated CRF to SDTM, how is that used at FDA? Are the bookmarks any way that they're set up? Is that useful by domain, by visit, by topic? Can you comment on that?
I think they're very useful. I understand that they are difficult to produce, and I appreciate that they are. But I can assure you, as a sponsor audience, that reviewers will depend on using annotated case report forms to help investigate issues related to data integrity and also safety and efficacy signals. So we appreciate all the work that goes into that. And if anyone has any other comments about how to make that easier, I think that's a separate discussion.
Hey guys, thank you. What's the selection criteria when you select an application for Jumpstart? You mentioned that not all the application goes through it.
Mm-hmm.
So what is your criteria, and do you communicate back to the sponsor that the application is going through the Jumpstart review?
Yeah, so the first question is, how do we choose applications? And the answer is, we don't. Reviewers request a Jumpstart service, and if we have the resources to give it to them at the right time, we give it to them. That's the basic model right now. We're looking at updating that. We're looking at figuring out ways of assigning different sets of different pieces of the Jumpstart service to different reviewers at different times. We're working at automating as much as we can to give them more. But the current paradigm is that they request a Jumpstart service and we give it to them. The second question about, do we tell a sponsor? No, we don't. OCS does not. A reviewer could. You could ask your review team if they're allowed to say, yes, we did get a Jumpstart service. And they often do say that, and they sometimes reference them in their IR, so you can always ask.
You know, I'm responsible for a lot of reviewer guides that go into new drug applications and making sure that they're good. I'm on the optimizing the use of data standards team. And I think this was an excellent exercise, because when I look at SDRGs and ADRGs, I'm like, is it right? Is it telling the truth? Are we providing the information that's in the template and in the technical conformance guide? But I'm not asking the right question, and that's what I've learned today. The question I need to be asking is there information that I know about my data that is going to answer a reviewer's question and make it easier for them to evaluate whether or not my submission is fit for review? And that is something, it's like a light went off in my head. So if I now know I need to keep a list of things as I'm looking at the data. If I have a question, I need to put that in my reviewer guide, because it was excellent to hear from Helena that, well, the first place you would look is the reviewer guide. I'm like, well, wouldn't you look at a listing? Wouldn't you do an investigation? Wouldn't you look at the define.xml to see how it was defined? They're going to go to the easiest place for a human being to review. So I really want to encourage everybody to come to our reviewer guide session tomorrow, because
Shameless.
we need to really beef that up and get into a regular process to put together the reviewer guide and make sure that it's meeting the needs of the agencies, the health agencies, and that's going to come from the TCG. So we need to keep comparing those two.
That's fabulous. And while we're plugging reviewers' guides, we're also anticipating the publishing of the reviewer guide in XML, because that could potentially allow us to take the information from an SDRG and put it here, so that the information that a reviewer might need to understand a finding is in the same place as the finding. And so, yay, XML SDRG.
Yeah, that's a separate issue. Crystal and I often have beers discussing that approach. But you, speaking of beer, I want to buy you a beer. So thank you so much for that plug. Thank you for the light bulb moment. Thank you for that validation. Because we do, in all of our communications as an office, we try to advocate passionately for reviewers and reviewers' needs, because ultimately all of us are going to be patients someday, or someone we love is going to be. And we want the safest and effective most effective drugs out there for them. So that is why it's not exercise in futility or making you dance. It really is the SDRG is a human to human communication about your data. So when I said earlier, oh yeah, put that in your SDRG, I imagine some of you in the audience, and I kind of even thought about this, are going, oh, where do I put it on the template? This doesn't go, this doesn't. I know we put a template reference in the PhUSE, the PhUSE template in our technical conformance guide, and we've worked very hard on that template. But don't let the template constrict you. If there is a valid issue about data quality or data integrity that human to human that you want the reviewer to know, fit it in there. It'll be okay. Thank you.
One more question?
Oh, hello.
Hi, Crystal. So after going through this, I'm a clinical reviewer for a couple of hours.
Sounds hard.
No, not at all. So some of these worksheets that were done as part of this core DF exercise, I was wondering, I think there was a little bit elaboration on it, but I may want a little bit more. How much of the defined file content is used in these reports generated by Kickstart?
Very little.
I'm going to say very little. We as a center at CEDAR have had real problems unlocking the full potential of the define to inform our tools and our automated processes. I know that it is a huge effort for you guys to create defines 1.0, 2.0, and now there's 2.1 out there. But the quality is so inconsistent that we generally have to engineer workaround even though we know that data might be right there in the define. So I'm just giving you guys that feedback as a sponsor audience that we've got a lot of work to do in that area.
Yeah, and so the answer of very little is specific to the core DF reports. The answer is slightly more for the Jumpstart service, right? So the Jumpstart team does use the define in different ways.
And the reviewer is free to engage the define at any point in the review process. There's no constriction there. So how reviewers may actually be using the define is something we don't have well quantified.
Yeah, thank you. So I think the exercise is dual way, since creating SDTM, ADAM, or SEND data sets is all about making them fit for use, really, fitting what they're supposed to serve as a purpose at the receiving end. And there needs to be a common understanding of that for the define file. And I don't think we've reached that level yet, making it all the more difficult to create and to put the right content into it. And so that goes for something like, we didn't get to that worksheet, but duplicate records, for instance. Would it go into the define file and read the key structure there? Something about value level metadata, definition of subqual variables, questions started coming up as I saw the reports where you could potentially harvest information from the define file to assist in some of these questions that are done. And I suppose my final wrap up of this topic would be, do you have a wish list of things that you would like the define file to support as part of, for instance, Jumpstart or Core DF? So I think that could potentially sprout a conversation on getting that to a better level, not a perfect one, but
yeah. We have a wish list of functionality for Core DF. It's not specific to the define XML. It's in there.
Thank you.
Sure.
So if I can add a quick comment, and we touched on this last night as we opened the meeting, and I think that the idea of thinking about this as a continuum that really involves each and every one of you, I think it's really important. And when I look at this, we are able to provide the service, which is the end product, because we are able to structure the data in a specific way. We weren't able to do that before. So data structuring in SDTM, in SEN, and in ADAM is fundamental to what we do. Then putting different artifacts around that to try to convey that information better, whether it would be defined, whether it would be ADA, all this, the reviewer's guides, whatever that is. I think that complements the package. So the idea of then being able to take that standardized data or structured data and be able to explain it so somebody can catch it on the other side and then apply tools and technologies and services on that, I think is what moves us forward. So when I think about everybody in here, so how many people work on data standards? Can you raise your hand? Okay. How many people work on tools and technology scripts, things like that, like the use of the data? Okay. And how many people actually submit regulatory applications? So as you can see, each one of you is involved in a piece of this, and I think we can only make this possible if we run that continuum through. So thank you again for all your support and your work on this, because it actually makes what we're doing possible. So at the end of the day, we're able to support regulatory review because the pieces are coming together. So I just would continue to encourage you to think about this as a continuum of work, and each and every one of you has a piece to contribute to that.
I'm going to ask a question about the define.xml that the lady in the back has. When I think of the define.xml, it's very hard to make, by the way. And there's a lot of people in this room that know how to make sure that it's good. But when the answer you gave about define.xml not helping Core DF or the Jumpstart team, I really thought, and it might be very simplistic, but I thought that the define.xml was machine readable and human readable definition of your database, and it's used to load into a data warehouse. Is that the use of define.xml at FDA? Because that's what I've always believed. Okay, thanks. I'm seeing a head shake. What is it used for?
It makes a pretty good data dictionary when it prints, which should be depressing to everyone, but that is the reality.
We do have a data warehouse, and it does consume SDTM data, and it does consume define XML. It has a lot of problems loading. Not using, but loading.
Once upon a time when the FDA was using WebSDM, it was necessary to have a define.xml that was actually conforming and so forth. Otherwise, they actually wouldn't be able to load your data into WebSDM. But now that WebSDM has been retired, that has changed. Right?
It has, yes.
So as a reviewer, I requested a jumpstart, for an application I'm reviewing. It has a mix of legacy and standardized studies with legacy data, studies with standardized data, and ISS and ISE. When I make that request, which of those studies will Jumpstart be applied to?
The standardized ones.
Go
ahead. It's on.
Okay, so easily can answer because I'm part of the person who goes and looks at everything that comes in for Jumpstart. So the main thing is that we're working with the standardized data. We don't do efficacy analysis. That's in the realm of our biostats. So I could say what you send to us would be, we would look at the SCTM data or the ADAM data, and we would primarily focus on those structured data. When it comes to the ISE, that's not in our realm of analysis.
And we can only look at the ISS if it's standardized. It doesn't matter STTM or ADAM.
And we typically only look at pivotal studies, and maybe not all of them. I mean, just the larger ones. Is that
That's
helpful?
important to know.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's a study cap to the number of studies that can be included in a single Jumpstart service, and generally because of that cap, we focus on pivotal studies.
And what is that cap?
4.
And the ISS is one of those?
It can
Yes.
be one of those.
I think that's okay. Thanks for the presentation. I just wanted to say WebSDM is actually still used at FDA. It does use a defined XML, but oftentimes I use the capability in Empirica Study, which is its new name. It builds its own defined XML based on the data. And I'm not super familiar with defined XML, but one of the main features that we use in it is the constrained control terminology listings. So that's one really useful piece of the defined XML that FDA, at least Empirica Study, does use.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, then I have another question. Let's say that we have a really good data, and then all the data submitted is follow standards, and then does that kind of make review time shorter if you have really good data? Or, I mean, in your experiences, maybe not officially, but when you have really good data from the sponsor, does that kind of make your job easier and then make the review time much faster than other kind of unclean data?
I'll answer that, yes. One thing we always are very pleased with, we get data that is of good quality, that we can run through our tools, and that we understand how it was constructed, and that there's no inconsistencies. Of course, those will run smoother and be easier to analyze. So yes, anytime there's problems, we have to go and try to make sure that we address those issues. So clean data is obviously always preferred.
It helps.
I should just sit by the microphone.
You can just take it with you.
Okay. John, you said something really interesting about how many studies can go into Jumpstart, and the answer was 4, and one of those could be your ISS. So you're going to be like, okay, I want my pivotal studies to be ready to go into Jumpstart. But so here we are doing NDAs with 40, 80, 90 studies,
Yep.
and we're working really hard to get that data transformed into SDTM so that